Hello, welcome back to LearnOikonomia. In this video, we are going to answer the question, how does aggregate demand affect price level? So, we have to understand that the prices of goods and services produced in an economy, these are the main driver of supply as well as demand in the economy. The inverse is also true. We can see that changes in supply and demand would impact the price of goods and services in the market, which say that there exists a kind of link between aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And what is that which equate aggregate demand and aggregate supply? We know it is the price. So when it comes to aggregate demand and general price level, there exists some kind of relationship, and this relationship is not necessarily clear or direct. There can be many complications with respect to this relationship. So, in a general sense, what we can say is that an increase in the aggregate demand, this is something which corresponds with an increase in the price level. And we can see that aggregate demand would increase when the components of aggregate demand would increase. Like I have already done a video on aggregate demand where I have discussed the components of aggregate demand. We know that the components are your spending, which is denoted by your consumption spending. Then it involves investment spending, it involves government spending, and also it involves net exports, which is spending on exports minus imports. So when there is an increase in any of these factors, there would be an increase in aggregate demand as well. On the other hand, we can see that if there is any decrease in any of the components of aggregate demand, then that will lead to decrease or fall in aggregate demand. And a decrease in aggregate demand is something which corresponds with a lower price level in the economy. So, what we could see is like a decrease in aggregate demand can occur when the components of aggregate demand fall, making all the other things constant, making all the other things influencing aggregate demand constant, or by taking ceteris paribus assumption. This is something which refers to a dominant assumption in the mainstream economic theory, right? So we have to consider this when we go for understanding the relationship between two variables. We know that when we are looking into a relationship between two variables, a particular variable can be influenced by not only the variable that we are looking at, but also some other variables would also be or would also be influencing the variable that we are looking into. So from a theoretical perspective, we can see that this is something which makes economists to isolate some particular events which occur within the economy, and this is what helps them to study the impacts. Again, coming to the concept of aggregate demand, as I've already told you, this is something which is composed of four components: your consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government expenditure, and net exports, right? So aggregate demand, it is the economic measurement of the total quantity of the final goods or the finished goods and services that are demanded in the economy. And this measurement, it is always expressed as a total amount of money which is exchanged for these commodities as well as services at a specific price level. And this is always at a point of time. We are not looking into the case of over a period of time. Over a period of time is not our area of concern right now, but when we look into the concept of aggregate demand, what we are concerned about is the point of time. So over a long run, we can see that aggregate demand is something which is equivalent to the gross domestic product of a nation. Moving to the case of price level, as we all know, this is the average of the current prices across the entire spectrum of goods and services which are produced in a particular economy. And general price level, as we all know, this is something hypothetical. And why it is hypothetical is because there is no uniform price for many types of goods and services in our economy, and prices are one of the most watched economic indicators of the world. We can see that when there's an increase in the price level which is sustained, we can see that it is inflation. When there is a reduction in the price level that is in a sustained manner, that is deflation. So all these kinds of things have its own implications on the growth of the economy, performance of the economy, etc. This is because most economists agree that price should stay relatively stable, and this is the main reason why economists believe in all these kinds of things. When there is deflation, when there is inflation, that shows stability is lacking with respect to the movement of prices. So we need stability with respect to prices. That is why economists agree that the prices should be relatively stable year over year. This is very much important to ensure that our economy is moving forward. So moving forward kind of thing is always looking at by all of us, right? So most price level estimates, this is something which are calculated by tracking the movement of prices of a particular set of goods and services. And this is in the language of economists, these goods are known as a basket of goods and services. And this is what is the basic idea that is used in the calculation of the consumer price index. And a collection of consumer based goods and services are examined in aggregate, and this helps us to identify changes in the broad price level over time. So that is the approach of consumer price index is all about. Now, when prices rise, we call it as inflation, and when prices fall, we call it as deflation. And price level is related to purchasing power of consumers. We all know when there is an increase in prices, or when there is inflation in the economy, the purchasing power of consumers would fall. So higher the price level, lower would be the purchasing power of money. Why this happens is because your purchasing power is something which gives a signal of how much you can buy. When price increases, what happens is that buying power would come down. This is because a single unit of currency, for example, if you take the case of dollar, $1 can no longer acquire the same amount of goods and services that it had brought earlier. For the same reason, the real price level, it is very useful. It is considered to be a very useful indicator which helps us to go for comparison of price of goods and services against the purchasing power of money. So, coming to the question we have started with, the relationship between prices and aggregate demand. Here we are looking to the concept of consumer demand, and in general we know that the price of goods or service, when it changes, consumer demand for that particular commodity would also get impacted. This is the basis of law of demand. There exists an inverse relationship between quantity demanded and price level. That is what the rule of demand or law of demand say, right? So we can see that this law of demand plays a very important role in economic analysis. Macroeconomists, they normally consider rising nominal prices as something which plays a very important role in economic demand, especially in the long run. And nominal price of good is something which looks into the value of this particular good in terms of money. If you are taking dollars, you can consider it as in terms of dollars. If you are taking the case of rupee, you can consider it in terms of rupees. Or if you are looking in terms of some other currencies, you can treat it in terms of the currency that you are taking. That's it. So the reason is because it could be something that would establish an unclear direct link between aggregate demand and general price level. So why we are saying that it is very much complicated sometimes to make a link between aggregate demand and price level. It is given that whenever a group of consumers demand more commodities or more services from the market, the price of these commodities would increase, and this would increase or this would make the price of the commodities go higher more than usual or more than normal, right? And this does not mean that price level have to rise. It is something that is induced in such a way to make the situation go out of control sometimes. Nominal prices can be compared to real prices. Real price is the value of the commodity which is expressed in terms of some other commodity, and the real price is something which helps us to make comparisons between one group of good or to a bundle of commodities across different time. And for economists, it is something difficult to determine if the prices are causing movement along demand curve or whether it is causing a shift in the demand curve, etc. We know that it is the movement along the demand curve which is caused by the impact in prices, right? So we can see that even though the demand for high definition televisions is higher than which has been in the past, the real cost of television has declined, and if the real prices is to decline even further, demand would definitely increase. Or put in other words, more people would be willing to buy $100 televisions rather than $1,000 televisions. Just to give you an example in that regard. So I could so the topic that we have taken today, it's a very light topic. It is not that complicated. So I hope you could understand it properly. So please like and subscribe to this channel, and you can be a part of my Telegram channel and Telegram group to discuss your doubts. That's all for today. Thank you.